Alrighty. So we're back to do more painting, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just minimize that, of course, right? Because we really want to have the space maximized. And unfortunately, like I said, I'm running on... looks like they're finally getting my teacher station up and running, so the videos you might see later in the year, or later even this term, they'll probably be a bigger resolution. But I've been working on one of the student stations. That's a good computer, but the monitor's a bit on the small side. So if you do see that change, that's going to probably be what that is. And so we left off with our painting, right? We ended up creating a texture, plugging it into the color material channel, but it was very much like that, and that's what that first video was, right? So I'm going to go back to the paint tools here. Remember the very top wrench and screwdriver are kind of our properties for the tool we're currently in, right? A lot of these basically are kind of properties and different attributes that the Blender has, right? And once you get used to that, it's actually really cool and really nice setup, actually. Like I said, the Blender 2.8 and above series is pretty amazing, pretty great, user-friendly, strong interface, workflows. A lot of good tools. So what I wanted to do is I just wanted to kind of continue kind of doing some painting on this body today. Now, we saw that I started painting this color here, right? And one of the things when we kind of go down here and we look, you know, we've got some colors down here. And remember, you can actually, and it'll save in your scene, which is really, really cool. And for right now, I want you guys to save separate images, but Blender actually has a feature. I know a student had a problem with this yesterday. I think it was Nana. You have actually autosaves. And so if you need to recover, go to autosave and you can kind of see that. Also, there's this really interesting thing that Blender does as well. External data. Automatically pack into Blender. So believe it or not, you can actually often have the textures packed into the Blender file, which is something a lot of software does not do. For right now, since we're only having like 2 normal maps and 2 color maps, maybe we'll do a metal map for the gear. We'll kind of ignore that, right? We'll kind of leave that alone. But I wanted to point that out. Blender actually really, when you start to get to know it, and I've gotten so much better with it, but and quite good with it. But there's still some areas I'm still figuring out as well, because, you know, haven't spent years and years and years in it like I did Maya or Modo. But it's a neat feature, and I actually take advantage of it a lot with BPainter, so that I don't have to save my textures again and again. And when you have a lot more textures, a lot more layers, it's really, really cool. So we'll kind of start to talk about that a little bit later on. We're not really going to need for this project, but I figured it'd be kind of cool just to get you guys to know that that's available. All right. So in this case, we notice, you know, we got the wrench and the screwdriver, and we can see I've got the color pick. But you'll notice that you can actually add new colors to this, right? And you can kind of see I've got the darker color for the main body, and then these lighter colors that I can use, right? So in this case, remember, you just kind of pick the brush that you want to work with. It's usually just the draw brush, and that's what we're using right now. You can kind of see the settings are saved from last time. You know, my strength's pretty low. I don't really need this on because I'm using a mouse instead of a Wacom tablet, but if you have a Wacom tablet and pen, definitely cool to use that. And this is something you could turn off and on. It allows you to use pressure from the pen itself. If you have a mouse, you can't do that. If you have a pen, you can, but you can turn it off and on. It's a really, really neat feature. I'm leaving it on because I don't have to worry about it. So we're still in the draw brush with low strength. Remember, I do like to kind of change the fall off, and sometimes, like, I'm working on a smaller monitor, so this gets cut off. Whereas if you're on a bigger monitor, you'll see that this area doesn't get cut off. But basically, this stuff right down here is all those things, right? So that's what's cool about kind of the wrench screwdriver. You'll still have all that stuff. And there's an area called fall off, and I like to have that set to smoother. So it's got a bunch of options here. If you want it constant, so it's much harder, you could do that. So this is kind of like your softness or hardness of a brush, or even like sharp, right? But we're good with smoother, and that was already set from there. And I'm going to click on one of these colors because that's what I had before. And we have that low strength. It's always better to have a low strength for your painting brush so you can kind of build up the color. Also, remember, this is 3D projection painting. So what's happening is it's projecting from the brush and the view itself. So these kind of lighter green pixels are going to project from right here, right? Like if it was a normal projector. So kind of like areas here where the polygons are facing away from the camera, you can get some weird kind of stretching and kind of anomalous texturing. So particularly when you're painting on a thin leg, I'd make the brush size smaller, right? The radius smaller. Remember, the bracket keys do this, right? The bracket keys are the ones between P and Enter on your keyboard. and just get a smaller brush size, and it makes it a lot easier just to kind of paint without getting any weird stuff there. And I'm not going to try to get this perfect and everywhere. It's just more than anything, it's just getting you enough of the actual tools to kind of understand how they work. But what's great is it paints over seams, so you don't have to worry about that. So you see when we paint, you'll notice it's painting in these different areas, right? Because remember, we unwrapped and we created marked seams for our UVs. So there's areas where there's seams, and you'll notice that Blender does a great job of painting over these. That's a leg, that's a leg. And so even though I'm painting on this leg, you see how it kind of paints across that seam? This is one of the amazing features and functions of 3D projection painting. A lot of software does this nowadays, right? Mudbox did this. This is actually no different than Mudbox, right? It's just in Blender. Substance Painter does these things. Modo actually has some strong 3D projection painting tools. Even ZBrush basically works this way. It's just you don't really get a terribly great layer system for painting in Blender, actually that's true in stock Blender, but in ZBrush as well. But like I said, there's actually some add-ons, which eventually I'll talk to you guys more about later in the year, on Blender Market that you can buy. There is a free layer add-on, which I'll show you guys later on, but there's a couple of more robust layer painting channel systems on the Blender Market that are pretty cool. And the nice thing is once you buy them, if you've created an account on Blender Market, right, it really kind of saves that. So when you log in, you'll see that it's there and you can just download new versions. So here I'm just painting, right? I have the regular draw brush. I have the color I want here. Remember, there is a color picker, particularly if you actually go up to here, right, and you click on this, there's your color picker, right? So you can sample that. Now, by default, Blender, it samples the shading color. So oftentimes, if you want the exact color, it's better to actually kind of go to the pull down here. Sorry, my bad. It's better to go back to here. What you could do is you could pick flat. And in fact, you could leave that, right? Remember how we had mocap on, you could have studio. You could leave that flat, and then you just have to switch between this one for your real-time preview and this one just for flat shade, and that'll give you a great way to kind of sample colors really quick. BPainter actually, its color picker, actually does that automatically for you. So there's really some cool, like I said, probably one add-on that like I said, I'm not going to require you guys get at all, but I definitely encourage you guys to maybe check out, and if you're willing to spend a little bit of money, for like $40, BPainter is pretty awesome, right? But you see, we just want to be a little careful. It paints over seams really well, but just when your kind of polygons are facing away from the camera, you have to be careful. And that's true of all 3D projection painting tool sets, right? 3D projection painting is amazing and awesome, but because it's projecting right from the camera and the brush, it can do weird stuff when the polygons are facing away. It's kind of like a scratch or a stretch, or almost like a glancing angle kind of effect. But you'll see as we go in here, we can kind of paint these colors in, right? And if our strength's low and our softness of our brush is low, it kind of gives you a kind of nice faded effect. And you just kind of build up that color more and more. Remember, radius is right here, so you type in a radius or left-click drag to make it bigger or smaller. But remember, the bracket keys also on your keyboard are great at kind of giving you some different sizes for your brush. And as we just kind of go in here and paint a little bit, because we have that low strength, it kind of just builds it up. And we can see we get some nice little color there. So of course I could go to right here, image, right? And we could just go to save image, and it'll save the color that we've been painting, so it automatically saves it. We could of course save our scene, Control S. And now you see we have a good kind of underbelly, because oftentimes you have kind of a darker color and then lighter colors on the body. And so that could be one of the kind of neat, cool things you could do with this. Now at this point, if we wanted to, we could get a darker color, right? Technically there's blend modes on these brushes actually, believe it or not. So if I close this and I go to, I remember where they're at. Actually, I'm trying to think where they're at. It's up here, right here. So right next to radius, you'll see is mix. And you'll see that in there you have dodge, burn, lighten, darken. I think we're just going to stick with kind of just going with maybe a darker green to paint a little bit of further variation. But one of the things that, like a lot of you guys remember from Mudbox, you really only had dodge and burn, right? And maybe saturation. Here you have a lot more options. You have much more of what you would expect to have, like in, say, Photoshop or Substance Painter or Modo. So once again, I wish Default Blender had a proper layer multi-channel painting system and kind of an easier way to get all any textures you wanted to paint on there. But the actual brushes themselves and all the settings and things you could do, like texture mask, textures, different strokes, are great. So Blender's actual painting tools are quite good, and it just needs a better default layer system. The free layer add-on will help that somewhat, but if you're really looking to kind of knock it out of the park and get it kind of up there with Substance Painter, you should really probably pick up something like BPainter. It does cost some money, but it's, in my opinion, it's worth it. Remember, guys, I'm not going to make you get that, though. We are going to kind of work within the constraints of that, of like the free add-ons. But I want to get you guys to see that there's a great Blender community out there. All right, so basically I'm going to pick, like, say, this green again. But remember, you can actually turn that dark down, right? So you can actually, whatever color it is, you can actually turn the lightness or darkness of it up, which is cool, right? And if you want, this little plus kind of adds it here, so it'll be added as kind of one of your colors. And now we just have a darker color. It's all the same properties. We just kind of go in here and paint like this darker green, kind of maybe on the armor shell area. And once again, you see how kind of it's doing a nice job. Now you'll notice it's painting on both sides. Technically, Blender could do that because it has its own kind of symmetry features, just like the sculpting does, right? But here's the thing. Because we have the UVs on top of each other, right, we don't need to do that, right? We don't have to have that on. It'll actually naturally paint on both sides because the UVs are the same, right? We've mirrored it over. Of course, you could totally tell Blender to repack all the UVs, relay them out so they're not on top of each other, and you can get full asymmetrical texturing. We'll explore that more in later projects, right? But for now, we're really just kind of trying to get used to the basic color painting tools, and how those can work to do some kind of neat stuff here. Maybe paint a little bit on the forehead there. Maybe even a little bit kind of up here. But it's always great to just get a little bit of color variation where you can, right? All right, there we go. Said just be careful kind of not to paint too far out. You know, you can get some kind of slight anomalous painting sometimes if you're not a little bit careful. You kind of see how it kind of does that. That's just because I was painting from a different angle. And you see as we kind of paint over it, it can kind of help to fix that up. But you do have to be a little bit careful with that, right? With how it's projection painting. But that's really just the nature of projection painting sometimes, right? We can just kind of slowly paint over any anomaly areas, or just undo, right, to paint it closer. But you see how we can just kind of get in here and get a little bit of nice kind of extra color there. Kind of darken things up, right? So kind of one of the things I wanted to start addressing with you guys today is just kind of further painting. Remember, you go to that image, save, right? One of the last things I wanted to kind of show you guys was how to paint with a texture, right? And it's the same like it is with sculpting, right? It's the same like it is with sculpting. I'm going to close this down because I'm tired of seeing that prompt stuff. All right. Oops. Undo. All right. So in this case, what I want to do now is I want to show you briefly, and I'll show you how to clean up that normal mapping stuff a little bit in the next video. Remember, we're getting down to the last couple weeks, and we're hitting the final stretch. We'll do some coloring this week and next week, and then I'll show you how to pose and light and render the character, which is pretty easy. So what I wanted to briefly show off here was the stamp tools, right? And we can use them with something called texture mask. Now, like usual, we have to kind of go to here, the little kind of red checkerboard, you know, kind of go to new to create that texture to bring it in again. Then we can go to open, right? And then I can find it on the download section, or desktop is where I have it. Dino skin, there we go. Make sure it's set to single image, right? So it'll load properly. We can see it's there. Now, I can't really see these, and I want to kind of keep minimizing everything, right? But you'll see that particularly if you want to use it as a proper mask, right? So that it'll actually just use the light and dark colors, right? So that texture, when it gets loaded in, you saw that it's black and then kind of white, right? What that means is that the white will paint, or as we've been sculpting, sculpt, and the black won't, right? So this is what we call often an alpha, right? And it's called DynoSkin 2 Alpha. And what it does is it's, particularly when you use texture mask, it sees the black and it says, I'm not going to paint that. I'm not going to sculpt that. I will just sculpt anything that's like any gray value, right? And with painting, it'll just paint it with color. So in this case, particularly if you don't want to have exactly the image and you want to just kind of paint the pattern on, texture mask is what you want to use, right? So I'm going to scroll down here, and this will be the last thing I'm going to show you guys today. I'm going to scroll down because it'll be easier to get to these here. I'm going to go to texture mask, and in this case, we do want view plane on instead of stencil. We'll talk about stenciling more on the armor painting, right? But I want view plane, and that's a good one to usually have on. And then, of course, we can click on this right here, right? And then you can make sure that that's the active texture, right? Then the next thing we need to do is we need to scroll down to stroke, right? And this is where we can either leave it on space, right? And you'll see it'll just paint that pattern on, right? So it's not actually painting the exact image, it's just painting that color. But the thing is that you can actually switch that stroke from space to things like anchored, right? And anchored, as we saw with sculpting, when you left click drag, right, it'll make it bigger or smaller. Now in this case, it's a bit light. Remember, that's partially the strength, so if you turn that strength up a lot, you see it'll go in there a lot darker. But you see as you drag, and if you drag left and right, it scales it, and if you drag up and down, it rotates it. And what you can do is you can start to go in here and you can start to lay some kind of cool color patterning on here. So you'll notice that all that stuff we were showing with sculpting, right, is available for painting as well, right? In this case, since we just want the pattern and we want the dark colors to not paint at all, and we want the light colors to paint with whatever color we picked, texture mask is what you want to use. You'll notice texture has all the same options, view plane, stencil. So if you're actually wanting to paint directly with the texture itself and it paints exactly the texture, you would actually use the regular texture, right, instead of texture mask. And we'll look at that a little bit more on our armor. For here, we're just kind of trying to add a little bit of that kind of cool freckling detail to it. But kind of neat to see that you can use texture mask in this way. So texture masking is in particular when you want to use alphas, when you have a kind of a black and white image and you want the black to not paint at all, right? It just doesn't paint anything. It's just empty and transparent. And then the white and the grays will paint just whatever color you have picked, right? Whatever color is selected. So that's what texture mask does. And of course, stroke gives us all these different options that are really cool. We saw line and drag dot for our sculpting. And you notice these are the exact same ones we have sculpting. So sculpting and painting work very, very, very similar to each other, right? So very similar methods. So I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to save. And then I'm going to save the scene. And that'll be a great place to stop for this video.